That should pick up from there. Why don't you just give me your name and when you were born, if you don't mind?
Well, I was born, I'm Lolita M. Ogilsbie. I was born July 25, 1895. Sunday, I'll be 81.
Sunday, you'll be 81. Down like that. And now we're recording. You said you were born on a canal boat.
Mm-hmm.
In Tonawanda?
The White Waters of Tonawanda. That's the section that goes off from the Erie Canal. Swings around.
You said something about a doctor coming up from Tonawanda, or?
Well, yes, they had a doctor from Tonawanda.
Come in. They pulled the boat along the bank and.
Yeah, tied up there.
Now you were born on your grandfather's boat.
On my grandfather's boat, that's right.
And how did your mother get to that boat?
Well, she was transferred in the Erie Canal from her in-laws' boat over onto my grandfather's boat.
And do you know which direction?
Yes, my grandfather was going to Buffalo, and her in-laws were going to New York. So that they were passing somewhere in the Erie Canal, and then they just pulled along slow, and she had her suitcase all ready, and they just transferred. The deckhands took hold of her hand and transferred her over from one to the other. I've been transferred back and forth on the boats that way myself.
I would think it'd be very narrow there, just enough for two boats to get in.
No, not too narrow. No, you have to hold rather close in order to do it, and slow up pretty well, slow the boats up pretty well.
And your grandfather's name was Vandervoort?
His name was Reuben J. Vandervoort.
The date you gave me before was the 4th of October, 1941. He died, and he was 88 years old. And he owned several boats? Is that right?
He only owned two.
Only two?
Only two.
You showed me a photograph earlier with, I guess you standing with your grandparents.
No, just my mother. My mother and father and my
that's right.
first brother were on the boats. But those boats were all laced together going down the Hudson. You see, when you got to Albany, they wouldn't take two boats down the Hudson River. You had to wait until there was what they called a chain, and then they would lace them together with the hawsers and...
The hawsers?
Hawser, Hauser, which means just a great big round rope.
Did you have to wait long before you got...
No, they usually were coming. Might have to wait a day or something like that. Then they would put them all together, and then they'd go down through.
Did you make that trip very often?
Not too often, no.
You were pulled by a tug?
Yeah.
There were the big steamers that were going by. There
were big steamers in the Hudson, but we were pulled by a tug, and also sometimes two tugs, and sometimes it would be it depended on how many boats there was in the unit, and the other tugs would be behind pushing sometimes. It would depend on how many boats were tied together going down.
Did you ever meet the people on the other boats that you were tied to?
Oh yes, we knew the other people lots of times. In fact, Russell Hunley's parents was one outfit that used to go down.
Mr. Hunter Jordan, right?
Yeah.
Do you remember the name of your father's boat?
No, I don't. I don't remember any of those names at all. The only names I can remember is the one that my uncle worked on.
The
Coyne Sisters.
Coyne Sisters? C-O-Y-N-E?
She sunk over in the large canal. He didn't own it. He just worked on it. That's the only names I can remember. One was the Coyne sister, and the other one was the Evelyn Coyne. Thomas Coyne, yeah.
Now, your grandfather came from Syracuse, is that right?
My grandfather originally came from New York City,
from New York City.
But the first I can remember anything about his mother was on West Belden Avenue. She lived there. I can remember a little girl, him bringing me there. I remember one time he came there, and his mother wanted him to stay overnight, and he didn't have anything for me to sleep in. And my grandfather had a stepfather, and his mother conceived the idea of putting the stepfather's nightshirt on me and then rolling up the sleeve, so you can imagine the kid. But
Do you remember what her name was?
I can't remember what her first name was. Her married name was Phillips. She was married to a man by the name of Phillips.
Phillips.
Then before he died.
Now you grew up then on your grandfather's boat.
Well, not really, no. Because I was around 6, 7 years old when we left. Up to 6 or 7.
Before you got to Fort Byron. And your brothers and sisters?
Well, they were on my father's boat. I never lived with them, you see. I was always with my grandfather.
Do you recall where they were born?
Yes, I know where they were all born. My oldest brother was born in Basin, New Jersey.
This is on your father's boat.
This is on my father's boat. And the next brother was born in Buffalo. The next brother was born in Syracuse, right down here at Plum Street. The boats were frozen in the ice, solid right there at Plum Street.
Is that, you mentioned to me last time, you were frozen in next to Mr. Hunn's boat? Is that the same?
They were frozen in. I wasn't. I was just visiting. I just come down from Jordan for the day. That's one time when they were next to the Hun boats. And my brother Arthur, that was my brother Charles that was born down here, and my brother Arthur was born in Jordan in 1914, and then when my own daughter was 3 years old, and I had been married 4 years, my mother had a little girl, and she was born in Jordan.
You thought very highly of your grandmother?
Very. Exceptionally so.
What was her name?
Her name was Minerva Evelyn Vandervoort.
Evelyn being her...
Evelyn was her middle name. She was called mostly by her middle name. The Minerva was, I guess, too sharp a name. I don't believe she cared for it. And she went with the name of Abby. 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 She died when she was 48 years old, and I was 13.
Did she teach you...
everything I ever knew.
Cooking? On the boat
How to
there?
bake? No. This was in the home in Jordan.
In the Jordan.
They taught me how to make bread and make pie and make cake. I could just do everything or anything. I had to put it on there. We had hardwood seats, kitchen floor, chair floors. Hardwood bottom chairs. And I used to put the bread pan on that. But I knew how to do it. She drilled me very thoroughly.
Now, when you were living on the boat, very cramped?
I don't remember too much about living on the boat, no. Because I don't remember too much when we moved off in Fort Byron. And the rest of the time that I was ever on the boat was when I just went for a visit. Just perhaps went from Jordan to New York, or from Jordan to Buffalo, or Jordan to Geneva, Watkins Glen, or something like that. It was just I remember one incident that we went to Watkins Glen, that the waves, the lake was was so high that the waves shot right over the deck of the boat, and that finished me. I never took any more trips on the boat.
Do you remember what you were carrying that load?
Salt.
Salt.
Mm-hmm.
And you're bringing it down to
Watkins Glen. Mm-hmm. And I unloaded it there to a big mill. Remember that. But I was not a boatman. I never cared for the boats, and I never cared for the water. It was nip and tuck to get me onto the boat. I got to the point where I wouldn't go unless my grandmother went too. I just didn't like it.
Can you say anything about what they looked like on the inside?
The boats? Oh, yes. There'd be 4 windows, two on each side, and their table usually sat in the middle here, and then they had lamps that fastened onto the wall. And then, well, it was about half the size, the cabin was about half the size of this, and then you went down
About maybe
a step.
Mm-hmm.
And that was your, what they call the staterooms. Your beds were bunks, 2 on each, one above the other on each side. That was about it.
That'd be just about below the water line or at the water line?
Well, it would depend on whether the boat was loaded or
or not.
empty, you see, where your water line was.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Now it had a small kitchen, I suppose, in it. And
Well, no kitchen. This part here was your kitchen, dining room, living room,
well, I mean,
everything.
there must have been some stove.
Well, your stove, your cook stove, and your cook stove. I can remember it in my father's boat when I took the trip. The stove was over in this corner, and the table was in this corner. Had a leaf that pulled up to make the table larger. Of course, the deckhands had to feed there at that table, but they didn't sleep in those compartments.
Mm-hmm.
They had compartments where the horses were kept, and they slept there.
And the horses were kept in the bow of the
They were
boat,
kept in the bow of the boat.
in the stable.
Sometimes 2 and sometimes 3 in the stable, depending on how many they wanted to pull.
Mm-hmm. 2 or 3.
2 or 3, it would depend on
2 or 3
I
mules
don't-
or 2 or 3 men?
2 or 3 mules, 2 or 3 horses, or sometimes a mule and a horse. It
Mhm.
depends.
I was talking to somebody earlier, and they said that when the horse or mule were going down into the stables, it was very steep. Mm.
Well, there was a swing thing that they used to have made purpose to go down in, but the opening was up here, and of course it had to go pretty straight. And then they would pull that up and put it out, and the horses would go out that way, out into the. And then when they came back in, I can remember one thing, they used to always take the horse by the tail, just kind of steer it, and I used to think that was wicked.
I've seen photographs of that.
To take the horse by the tail to go, for it to go down, and I used to think that was wicked. Yeah.
Did you ever see any accidents when they were
No,
on?
I never saw any, no.
But they change them every 6 hours?
Usually,
Usually.
yes.
Mm-hmm.
One of the mules on my father's boat, the collar was a little bit coarse, and it rubbed its breast here where it pulled on it and made a big sore, and they couldn't heal it. And so my mother attempted to use some sort of balsam or something that she had gotten at the drugstore, and she cured that spot on the mule. But the men who were working for them, they couldn't cure it. She did. They didn't take pains, you see, that was the trouble. They didn't want it, they didn't bother it. But she had a feeling for the mules, and she liked them, and used to pet them and make of them, and so she cured the spot.
And the men that drove the mules, they would have their meals with you?
They would have the meals, the people that were running the boats, yes.
Did you get to know them pretty well, or?
Oh, sometimes it did. There was one that worked for my grandfather that I knew very, very well, because he thought a great deal of me. And he used to, every time the boats would stop somewhere, he'd take me off and buy me ice cream and candy. I thought that was a treat.
They were like in their 20s, or?
You have this thing on.
Yes, it's on. I hope so.
Well, I won't tell you this then.
Oh, okay.
I would tell you something else, but...
This is about the man that drove the horses?
Well, this is about the man that worked for my grandfather when I was a little kid, when he'd take me off the boat. Can't tell you that because...
I can turn it off.
You turn it off and I'll tell you.
Okay. Were these people that drove the mules, were they teenagers or in their 20s?
No, they were usually, well, it didn't matter what their age was. Any age, 25, 30. Anybody that was interested in boating or could handle horses or mules, they were the ones that they employed.
Now, when winter came on, you probably left your boats right in the canal, or... But what did, like, your grandfather do, or these mule drivers do, or...
Well, I don't know what they did, of course, and I don't know what they did on my father's boats, but when two different winters, my father's boats were frozen in right down here at the same spot. And one of the years was when the Hun boats were frozen in down there at the same time. But I don't know, those who worked for them probably just went and got themselves jobs someplace else. But there would be nobody staying on the boat except themselves. And what they did with the animals, I don't know. I can't remember that part. Some things I don't remember.
Well, you're doing very good. I really appreciate you letting me do this.
Well, that's all right. Sure. There's one mistake we made in this. I think you have it in that. It was when I worked at the coal office there. I said Mr. Converse. It wasn't Mr. Converse. The coal office was Converse and Lewis.
Converse and Lewis?
Converse and Lewis. That was the name of the coal office. And Mr. Lewis had bought out Mr. Converse, and it was Mr. Lewis who I worked for, not Mr. And I said Mr. Converse, which I misspoke.
Well, we'll get into that. When you were about 6 years old now, you settled in Fort Byron.
We wasn't there too long.
These are some photographs of the Tanner Dry Dock. I wonder if they look at all familiar to you.
Well, no. Now where on earth did they ever do these up, I wonder?
That's about 1908. They were donated by a descendant of the Tanners.
Oh.
Do you recall Mr. Tanner at all?
No. No, I was too young. No. I don't recall him at all. All I know is that my grandfather worked for him for a short time. He sold his boats and he went to work there. I explained to you that my grandfather's boat ran into something and put a hole in it. It was leaking. And they had to pump it out by hand. And they were pumping and pumping. And as soon as they got to Tanner's Dry Dock, where they put the boat on the dry dock and had that repaired. And while there, it gave Mr. Tanner an opportunity to talk with my grandfather. And the boating was getting very slim. It wasn't paying. And my grandfather wished to sell his boats. And Mr. 10. He said, well, why don't you come to work for me? So that's what he did. Well, he only worked a short time for him when Mr. Strickland, Charles Strickland Jordan, happened to come up there. And he wanted my grandfather to come down and be manager of the dry dock, which my grandfather did, so he wasn't in Port Barron too long. And you saw the picture of me taken on the way. That I...
Or was it that?
No, this is my granddad, though.
That's a picture of the Walter McMullen going through Gear Lock.
Going through Gear Lock, and here's my granddad right there.
Yeah. Now, what was your father's position at all on the Walter McMullen?
My father had no position.
Your grandfather.
My grandfather, he was the captain.
He was the captain?
The captain of the Walter McMullen. He was the steersman. His position was right in here, steering the packet boat. And this is the picture that I'm on. I used to ride back and forth with him, and I'm riding in there. There's 3 or 4 kids there, and I'm one of them.
Now, when he was the steersman for the Walter McMullen, was that after or at the same time that he was working at the Strickland dry docks?
No, it was after they didn't use the dry dock anymore. He went to work on the Walter McMullen on the packet boat.
As long as we have this picture of Gears Lock, you were telling me about, what was his name that operated the store there?
That operated the store, not at Gears Lock, at Jordan Lock.
At Jordan Lock?
At Jordan Lock. That was Michael Abrams.
Michael Abrams.
At one time. And he was an own cousin to Floyd's father.
And so when you were going through the lock, he would come out and take orders?
They would, at all the locks, they would come out, the grocery man would come out and take the list. The woman of the house would hand the list up, and they'd bring the stuff out. And the novelty of the thing that always delighted me was the fact that they brought this milk pan, it was called, tin pan, out, filled with leaf lettuce, and the roots were all down the bottom, so those pretty leaves all came up, and then right in the center would be a bouquet of Sweet Williams. And that was always a novelty to me.
Oh, just one thing, getting back to Fort Byron. You were living at a house, you mentioned before.
3 stories.
3 stories?
3 levels. The level we lived in opened out on one road, and then the next level opened out on the bank of the canal. And then the upper level, the road was going this way, and there was a bridge right there.
You don't recall what street that was on?
I think the lower level was Dock Street. Do you remember, Floyd? Well, when I was looking for my birth certificate, if you remember, it mentioned, and I think it was Dock Street, the lower level, but the other streets I can't recall what they were.
You were also talking about the boat Kate?
Well, the boat Kate was the smaller boat of Mr. McMullen that he was discarding, or Mr. Strickland, that he was discarding when he put the Walter McMullen into service.
Now that
Do you remember the old Kate, Floyd? See, his father was a farmer in the country, and they used to bring eggs, a big fruit and poultry farm. And they used to bring eggs and fruit loaded on the Walter McMullen to ship it in the city.
Did the Kate look like the Walter McMullen?
No, it wasn't as nice a boat as Walter McMullen. It was smaller and not as nice. And it was at the point where it had its day. It was deteriorating. But that's the boat that we moved from Fort Byron to Jordan. Pulled off in the wide water there in Jordan, and just a little ways up to the house to carry the furnishings. I can remember that part.
So the Walter McMullen, even the way I've read about it at the museum, was a very, very pleasant boat.
Mm-hmm. Very.
Do you remember anything special about it?
No.
No? It carried passengers mainly, or?
It carried passengers some, but it carried merchandise from Jordan into Syracuse, just the same as a truck would now.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you used to send...
And back, sorry.
Yes, and back. You used to send apples and cherries and stuff like that, and eggs. They had a white leghorn farm, and they used to bring their eggs in and ship them great big cases stacked, a lot of them.
We have 2 cats at our house. They don't get along at all.
That's how come we have her. The people who had her had a cat and a dog. And then they brought another cat there. And she and the new cat didn't hitch. Where she left home, came to live with us. She came from Cherry Road over here. She's been here with us ever since. And she loves us and we love her. She's a darn cat. She's 13 years old.
Mm-hmm. I have some pictures of Jordan.
She was 7 when we... yeah.
Do you know where that is?
No.
Well, this you'll probably
Well, now,
recall.
wait a minute. I don't know, there's a bridge here.
Mm-hmm.
Gosh, I wonder if these were taken. Who had these?
I don't know, but you'll recognize this one here.
Yes, and I'm wondering if this is part, but I'm just wondering, my cousin from Syracuse used to come to Jordan and pick me up in the Chris Craft, and we'd come down to the Canal's feeder up here and dance. I just wonder if that might be him. Yes, I don't know where that is.
That's kind of like the picture you showed me earlier.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's the exact same one or not, but
I think it is. I think it's the exact same one. This is where the telephone office was, up in
that
here.
building to the,
Yeah.
what is that, the left?
It's up at the top here.
Top left.
And this is the bridge that I told you when Mr. would come into town. I was working up here, and when he would come into town, and his little horse's feet would hit the end of that bridge, I'd get up and look because I knew it was him coming into town.
Mm-hmm.
That was 4 wheels
Mm-hmm. Was the dry dock near there?
there. The dry dock was down this way.
Mm-hmm.
You know where there's pictures of the aqueduct? Well, the aqueduct is like here, and the dry dock was right over there.
See if I have some other pictures. This is when the canal was dry.
Well, here's where the dry dock. In fact, here's the opening that goes into the dry dock right there. Here's the aqueduct over here.
It was just
And they used
west of the aqueduct?
just east of that.
Just east of
Just
it.
east of it. Did you get that where my finger was there?
Right here? Right in the center of the picture just about? Where there's that small opening in the
Yeah,
bank?
there's just that little opening right there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And this here is, the bridge is way down here.
Do you recall what these buildings were for? I guess the feeder comes in through here.
Well, I think these were where they stored the coal that I spoke about. That would be the office would be out here.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that what that is, Floyd? That picture right there? Isn't that Converse and Lewis coal building? This is the Kramer block here. And here's the steeple to the Presbyterian church, which was torn down.
You were talking about a bell
Mm-hmm.
at the dry dock.
Mhm.
And you,
The bell is up in the
Jordan Historical Society, and you would ring it for...
noon for the men to quit and ring it at night for them to, quitting time for them to quit. That, I always like to go down there and be there time enough to ring the bell, because when it would be time, my grandfather used to say, go ahead and ring the bell. I used to get a big kick out of that.
And your father was manager then of the dry dock?
No, that was my grandfather.
Or your grandfather, I'm sorry, I keep getting, slipping the
Well,
tongue.
my father wasn't even within Jordan then.
Mm-hmm.
At that time. My father didn't come to Jordan. They didn't come to Jordan until the year that we were married, did they, Floyd? That was 1914. They didn't come to Jordan until 1914.
That was the year you were married?
That's the year I was married. I was married October 6th, 1914.
You showed me a picture of you standing in front of the dry dock gates.
Water seeping in through. That's when it was deteriorating. The gates were deteriorating and it got old and all falling down like and it showed the ways where
The what?
the ways of the things that they filled it with water and then they'd open those big gates and they'd float the boat right in on those waves. And the boat would sit on those waves, and then they had a smaller set of gates that they let the water all out of when they work on the boats.
Mm-hmm. I was talking to a gentleman, there were a set of dry docks in Fayetteville, and he said that one of them was for heavy boats and one was for light. They were specially constructed. One had more timber in it for loaded boats. Do you recall if that was similar in Jordan?
I don't recall that, no.
Were there two sets of...
I don't think so. I think there were only one set of what I call waves.
Mm-hmm.
No, I don't think there were two. If there were two, I don't remember it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you remember how many men there were working at the dry dock?
I can't tell you. Not too many. I don't imagine there was more than probably a half a dozen besides my grandfather. It wasn't a big business at all. But I remember one thing. My aunt and uncle had a houseboat, and one winter they put it in on those, floated it in the dry dock, and they spent the winter. They lived in the houseboat on those waves, and that's when I was keeping company with Floyd. And we used the Methodist church was just a little ways from the dry dock, and we used to go to church, and in the evening we'd go back over to my uncle's houseboat. For 1 year he spent on living on the ways in the dry dock. That was when the dry dock was not being used anymore.
Do you recall when that was? About what year that is?
That was about...
Before you were married, so it would be about 19...
Yeah, that would be about 1913, wouldn't it? That was in the winter of 1913.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember when they drained Jordan?
I don't remember, no. I remember that.
When was it that you moved up to Coleridge?
Avenue. We moved from Jordan to Coleridge Avenue, what day?
42? 1942?
We were there 5 years, a huge big house. My mother-in-law with us and my daughter. And my daughter married and my mother-in-law passed away and left Mr. and I in that huge 14-room house, and that's when we sold that. We came up here. We've been here 29. Some ways his memory is a little bit better than mine, things like that, but I can remember things back.
And what year was it that you came into Jordan? Probably just a year or two, about 1901.
Well, let's see, 1895, 96, 97, 98, 99. Probably one or two.
1901 or two.
1901 or two. Well, probably it could be 1901. I have, in a box, if I could ever find it, our third floor. It's not really an attic. We have 2 rooms up there, but I use it as storage. And the roof slants, and I have to go back under there to get into this box to get these postcard albums out. But I expect there's pictures in there. I can tell some of these too. I don't ever expect to get back in there. It's too hard for me to get under this slimy roof in there. We partially clean it out, and then I get tired of it, and I say, oh, let's quit. Give up. But I know I have cards in there.
Now, you worked as a telephone operator, right? And you worked a short time at the coal company. Which came first?
The coal company.
The coal company came first.
And then I worked in Allen's drugstore.
That's an Allen's drugstore?
Howland.
Howland.
James Howland drugstore. At the same time, I was working at the telephone company because I was just a part-time operator. And then they disbanded the office there, the telephone company office in Jordan. And they offered me a position with the New York Telephone Company here in Syracuse. But we were going to be married the 6th of October, so I refused the option of my TV position.
One final question about the canal boats and the cargoes that you carried. You mentioned the salt on the trip to Watkins Glen, but you carried just about anything? Lumber,
Merchandise. I remember one time they had a load of teas and coffees.
teas and coffee.
Tea and coffee, packaged tea and coffee, and there were other things with it. But I remember some of the packages of the tea and coffee got broken, and the coffee beans were rolling all around. I remember that part. But I had the most fun when the boat was empty and you could race around in the boat.
The cargo.
The cargo was gone and the boat was light. And we always, they had a little ladder that went from the door that went down into the midship. We're down in there and we used to play the whole length of the boat.
Did they ever load the whole cargo area with like wheat or?
Oh yes.
Well, just
Oh, yes.
dump it right in
Lots
there.
of times, wheat, corn, oats,
Hay.
elevators. The elevator, there used to be big tall elevators that used to load that stuff in the boat. They load one section and then they load the boat and then they load another section. And I can remember that.
And going through locks, was that a pleasant experience, do you remember?
Well, it was, no, I used to get a little bit scary. As I've said before, I was not a canaler. I didn't like the canal, I didn't like the boats. And of course, you get a little bit scary because if you were going in one direction, you'd pull in on a lower level. Well, then they would shut the gates behind you, and you were way down in there. And then they'd start letting the water in, and that would raise you right up. And on the other hand, if you're going in another direction, you come in high, and then they'd lower you down in. That part I didn't like much when going down in, because you'd see all the slime and green stuff and all along the
You're
walls.
very close to the walls. I guess they just fit in the
They
boats.
just fit in, and you'd be very close to that.
You ever bang against the walls, or was it
No,
kind of a
no, I
gent?
never banged. Of course, they had protection anyway. They had a big rope. What do you call them, Floyd?
Kind of a bumper.
Fender. Well, kind of a rope fender. It would be, so that if certain parts of the boat, not like it shows you have a picture there of a pointed boat, or where that pointed boat came around like this, it rounded on the corners of those places. Sometimes they had these rope things that hung there. That was for protection if the boat banged away. The rope thing would be a bunker, you see.
It was smooth as you went down, though.
Oh yes,
Awkward.
you didn't, there was no bumping, you didn't realize that you were going down, but you could watch and you could see what was going on, and I never was too crazy about that part of it. I wasn't too crazy about canaling anyway.
I guess that about wraps it up. I have some other photographs here that aren't really canal related, but they're Jordan that you might want to look at.
Oh yeah, here's, with these horse and carriage. Who used to bring the people into Jordan?
Did you go very often into Syracuse?
Well, the Walter McMahon went every day. And of course, I would ride just for the sake of going with my grandfather when there's cruises. Well, now over here, this is what they call the Iron Bridge.
Right, you'll see a picture of that, right?
Yeah. And over in here is where his father's farm was. And after I married him, I spent the first 15 years of my married life right in there.
Do you remember a covered bridge?
Yes, Jack's Riffs, covered bridge, oh sure. And I remember what they call the Kissing Bridge, too.
No, I don't have a picture of that, I don't think.
No, I don't think you do have. And,
Narrow sidewalk.
yes, but the Kissing Bridge had a story. It was down near the railroad, and if you knew your senses, you would keep away from the Kissing Bridge, because you come on one end and somebody that wanted to harm you would be standing on there, and you couldn't get away when you got on that. You were fastened in there. And I sang in the Methodist Church choir for 17 years, and one of the ladies that sang in the choir lived in between those two railroads, and her husband was a mail clerk, and she didn't have any guns, she didn't know how to shoot, but she had her windows open one night, and she looked up just in time to see this man. He'd taken the curtains very nicely and put them up behind pieces of furniture. And he was clearing the window with one foot ready to put down, the other one all ready to come in, put his arms up like this, and he was all ready to come in. And she grabbed her, she was funny anyway, and she grabbed her flashlight and she said, "Get out of here, I'll shoot you dead." And just nothing, and he saw the nickel on the flashlight, and he took off, and in order to get away, he had to run through a creek. You remember that. And one night, this same lady, she had to walk the Kissing Bridge to get up to choir practice. She came in there one night, and she had 2 hat pins in her hat, and they had big ends on them, big round ends stuck way out like this, and everybody commenced to laugh. And they said, what on earth? Of course, they were outdated, years and years and years. And they said, what on earth do you have those things? And she pulled one of them out and she said, listen, I had a jerk stop me on the kissing bridge down there. She said, and that ever happens again, he's going to get that rammed right through him. I'll never forget that. You remember Mrs. Phelps?
Do you recall how many people worked on the Walter McMullen? There was your father, his steersman.
There was my grandfather.
Your grandfather.
My grandfather. See, I never spent any time with my mother and father,
Right.
so I don't, they
That's a
almost
slip
were,
of the tongue.
they were almost strangers to me. There was my grandfather, and I don't know if Strickland himself go on at some time. Oh, my grandfather's captain.
Strickland all the time.
Captain, of course, Strickland was the owner.
Right.
He was the owner. He might have been captain, and my grandfather was assistant captain or something. But my grandfather did the steering. Had the big wheel and used to do the steering, and I used to sit on the little bench up in front, so he could keep his eye on me, I suppose, so that he didn't fall in the water.
This was a steamer, right? It wasn't pulled by horses.
No, this was a steamer.
So you probably had somebody to
Well,
watch the boiler or
they-
Fireman and engineer.
Yes, and then they used to have men who handled the produce and whatever they were shipping had men who handled that. But I wouldn't remember how many.
no more than maybe a dozen.
Probably not much more than that. I wouldn't say it was even. He, of course, remembers the Walter McMullen and what they did and one thing, not as much as I did. He was in the country school 3.5 miles north of Jordan. That's where I showed you here in these. He lived around here on this road here, Monsignor. And so he, in shipping and stuff, but when he graduated from the 8th grade, that was when he came down into Jordan to the high school, and that's where I was. I never knew him when he was bringing stuff to the boat. I didn't know anything about him. But it was when he started going to school and was in high school down there that I became acquainted with him.
Now you were going to school at the same time?
I went to Jordan High School at the same time.
Now you started school in Fort Byron,
I
right?
was at school in Fort Byron, yes. I well remember that because I was a very smart little kid, and they pushed me. But when I got to Jordan, they set me back a grade. So I lost the grade in there. So I would have been right up with him, but he was a grade ahead of me. For the simple reason that they set me back a grade. When you change schools, it's customary that they do that. I should have gone in the 3rd grade instead of that, and put me back in the 2nd.
Do you remember if Walter McMullen was very crowded with passengers any times when a lot of people on it?
Never. Not unless they...
Passengers.
not unless they took out a picnic or something like that. That would be the only time.
If they had a picnic, they'd probably get a lot of people on.
Yes, they would be crowded then. They might have taken a church Sunday school or something like that out. That part I don't remember, but as far as passengers were concerned, there never was too many riding on it.
Do you remember how long it took you to go from Jordan to Syracuse?
I can't remember that at all. And I can't remember how long it took to go from New York to Buffalo. I've been asked that different times, but those are things that I don't recall.
Did they charge you for, or probably not you, but passengers?
They charge for passengers, yes. So
From
much.
Jordan to
Do
Syracuse?
you know how much the fee was for a passenger ride? But I don't remember that. But of course, I was with my granddad. It didn't cost me anything.
Right,
I could ride all the time as far as that went. So I wouldn't know. I was never charged.
Did you ever hear of people going down to New Jersey for the winter?
Yes, different ones.
That was done though.
That was done. The different ones would, if they happened to be down at that end, they'd stay in New Jersey. If they happened to be up in, that's how come my one brother was born in Bushnell's Basin, New Jersey, because they were.
Oh, Bushnell's Basin, New Jersey, not Rochester.
Oh no, Bushnell Basin.
Oh, okay.
New Jersey. That's where my oldest brother was born. Down there.
And if they were at the other end?
If they were closer to the other end, well, they'd stay in Buffalo. And of course, that's what they were headed for. When I was born, they were headed for Buffalo, and they were going to stay there long enough for me to be born, but they never got there. For me to be born, after I was born, well, then they went on. I only weighed 4 pounds and a half. Carried me around on a pillow. I don't look like that now. Things change.
Well, I guess that does it for today. Unless you have anything else you'd like to say about it.
No, I don't know if you have my mother and father's name or not there.
Oh, yes.
Just my grandfather's name.
I'll take your parents' name.
Well, my parents' name was Oscar and Olive.
Esslinger?
Esslinger, Esslinger. And it was a funny thing. I wanted to get my birth certificate, and we had paid out $11 and still didn't have it. So, someplace where we went, they suggested that we go to the, what would it be there, the Wilbur House out in Jordan, town clerk's office for our marriage license. And Floyd went in to get it, a copy of our marriage license, and here they had my name down, that he had married Lolita Vandervoort. And I never went back. Lolita Vandervoort, he had married, and I had never gone by the name of Vandervoort at all, because my grandfather's name was Vandervoort.
Right.
The town clerk's office, instead of finding out what my name really was, he just puts down Vandervoort. See, everybody just knew I lived in that home, and they concluded I was a Vandervoort. I wasn't. I was.
Where were you living in Jordan when your father worked at the dry dock?
Yeah, we were living in Jordan.
Was it near the dry dock though?
No, no. No, it was up at the other end. It was up off of Clinton Street, on Liberty Street.
Okay. So I'll turn this off now.